Hello everyone, welcome to the 11th episode of the podcast Shaping a Fairer World. Today I have with me Siddharth Satish. He is a rising junior attending West Windsor Plainsboro High School North in New Jersey. When he is not trying to advocate the UN SDG goals, he can be found reading health economics novels or debating various motions and pieces of legislation. Hi Siddharth.
Hi Ayush, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm doing great, thank you.
You're welcome. Maybe like I've just given this two-line introduction about you. Can you please tell us more about yourself?
Of course. So I am, as Ayush mentioned, a rising junior, so 11th grade student attending school in New Jersey in the United States. And apart from all the work I do with the UN SDG goals, I also love to debate. Debating is actually one of my favorite pastimes and hobbies that I engage in both inside and outside of school as well. So that's one of my favorite activities to engage in, perhaps because I get to see both sides of a point of view, both sides of a perspective on a topic. And typically I do congressional debate or parliamentary style debate. So we can debate sample motions that have an impact on society. So everything that I do, I try to incorporate a bit of the UN SDG goals, a bit of the impact on the world and the society into it as well, because I think that's really important no matter what you're doing in life. And also, I'm an avid health economist novel reader. I've recently gotten into that field, just seeing the intersection between medicine and economics, which I think is really important going forward in the future. And it's quite a niche field of study that I fell into just with common interests in the past. So I'm sure I can go into more detail about my projects and stuff in the future and in the next few minutes. But I think that's just a bit of about me and what I like to do academically outside of, all my projects. And just personally, I'm very enthusiastic about my culture, the Indian culture. So whenever I have time in our communities, we try to go out and enjoy events like Garbas and Dandiyas that we have in our local areas as well. So trying to keep that culture alive. But yeah, that's how I spend most of my time.
That's so good. Like you said, you love debating. Same with me. Like I joined the Model United Nations Club in my school. Maybe you also have that in your school. Model
Yes.
United Nations.
We have Model United Nations and Model Congress. I compete in the congressional division.
Oh, that's awesome.
Thank you.
So you said you try to advocate about sustainable development goals in your debate sometime. So I want to ask you a question about that. How did you get passionate about like United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or even got to know about them?
So I think it just all fell into place. I think like ultimately when I look back on the story that I'm going to tell you, obviously it just felt right and fell right into place. So I knew about the UN SDG goals going into eighth grade, going into ninth grade because of the fact that we had something called a global challenge inside of our school.
Oh,
And
okay.
graduating eighth graders, when they're going into ninth, they needed to compete in a project where you'd work with a group that was selected, and you would work to develop a prototype or a solution to a problem the world is facing. And that's where I got obviously introduced to the SDG goals and its different motives. And so basically my project was initially focused on immigrants and refugees in Syria and all these different areas in the Middle East and even in Latin America who are fleeing their countries. So we developed an inflatable prototype to help combat and make accommodation much easier. So a storage and a dual purpose bed also. So we prototyped that. We actually made it and presented it in front of our judges and had a chat with the United Nations HCR about it because we made it to the next level of the school competition. I think that's what initially started this whole passion for, the SDG goals and change. But after that, going into high school, just trying to continue this whole project was something that I obviously tried to engage in. But soon I found that there's more stuff that I wanted to change and more ways I can make my mark and more ideas that I had. So, I mean, that's how I started all of the things that I have started at this point in time.
That's so good. Like same way I also got passionate about them. Like I got to know about them. And after that, like I couldn't stop myself like working on it. Just went on and like thinking of ways to change the world, as you said. So that's pretty good. I remember when we were having a chat on social media, you said like some of your projects are like focusing on these goals, like eight, seven, n number of goals. So, what are the goals that you're most passionate about, and like why?
So I want to preface this by saying that like all of the goals that the UN has is like are equally as important.
Yeah.
Some of the ones that I personally like really just interact with on a regular basis just because of the types of work that I do are centered around the UN SDG goals on health and promoting equity in health, and also one on reducing the poverty and inequality inside of society. So to put that in perspective inside of numbers, the equity and equality and reduced inequalities would be UN SDG goal number 10. And then 3 would be good health and well-being.
Good health.
And I always, inside of all my projects, you'll notice number 4, the good education and being well read is a big component about each one of my projects, because I just think that it's important to be increasing education and giving education to people who haven't received it, because you and I are really lucky, and I'm sure those who are watching this are also most often very lucky to have a school, to have teachers, to have educational curriculums that are specifically designed for us. So that those 3 are perhaps one of my top goals that I always advocate for whenever I do anything.
That's good. Like, because as you said, the education is the most important too. Like, because I think like once a person is educated, like he'll get a good job, he'll get good salary, so he won't be hungry, or like he'll be well educated, so he won't be doing some inequalities between other people. So most of the goals will be tackled automatically once a person is educated, and he'll be able to help out many other people also. Um, so what are the some of your projects? Like, can you tell us like what are your projects that you're working on?
Yeah, sure. So one project that I work on 3 overall projects centered on the UN SDG goals. The first one is a podcast that I've created. So, being part of the debate community, you observe a lot of things, and I'm sure Ayush, you can attest to this as well. Whenever we go to competitions and compete against different schools and people, we see things that typically many high school students don't. So I compete in an array of different debates. As I mentioned, I do Model Congress, I do National Speech and Debate, and do Congressional Debate inside of that. I do Policy Debate, I do Mock Trial, Moot Court. So I'm really involved in that area. But I also noticed that people from low income and rural communities don't have that access to debate and education on debate. So I think that's a big issue for me in my community, because we didn't have a really well-built National Speech and Debate Association chapter. And I desperately wanted to, go to nationals and advance my points of views and really talk about things on a larger scale. So using that as kind of the background and using the knowledge I'd gained just from watching YouTube videos and, stalking all of these different resources that the various debate associations put out, I was like, I need to make this and pay it forward. So what I did was I made this podcast centered around debate, centered around political activism, and bringing conversations on both sides of the spectrum about issues. So I think that's something that debate really does. And that's like, at least in the US, there's Republican versus Democrat versus independent. There's so many different points of views and perspectives that all of them need to be recognized. So initially I was just thinking of doing a regular old, politics podcast, but then I thought, why don't the youth start talking about the issues, but present both perspectives of it? And, really just talk about what makes each side invaluable to the conversation that we're having inside of our Congress, the conversations we're having in Parliament, and all of that. So that was my first initiative, and that's changed in response to the COVID-19 virus. We're trying to facilitate more cross-cultural communication. So making more cultures, in my community at least, feel comfortable with each other, and we've expanded this to communities beyond with more and more team members inside of our podcast and with our listeners across the world as well. And, overall, we have 1,000 dedicated listeners across 5 countries, which, it's not good. Yeah, but it's not a lot compared to, the Wall Street Journal and all the other podcasts that are out there. But I think that, it's just a step, and any person who listens to it, I think I've done my job in communicating and giving them a holistic view of, what's happening. And then it comes my nonprofit, Memoirs. So this was centered around an observation I had when I visited my grandfather in Chennai, India. So when I visited him during the summer, he's 95, he's my great-grandfather. So he lived during colonial rule, British Raj of India. And he was quite young in the sense that he was older than me, I think 18, when India got its freedom from Great Britain. So he obviously has had a lot of unique experiences that we only read about in history books, or, we quote Gandhi, but he's seen Gandhi, he's interacted with him. So, I mean, that's quite an interesting perspective. But obviously with age comes ailments, and he suffers from Alzheimer's and dementia. So one day when we were having, the morning tea, and I was talking to him, he was telling me about his childhood, and I thought I could search all of the stuff he was telling me. So I showed him the school that he was talking about, the town that he lived in, the village that he grew up in. And slowly I found that his memory started improving as I showed these images. Obviously, Alzheimer's or dementia wasn't cured, but every time he had those slip-ups, when he would repeat something he'd said a few minutes ago, he would catch himself after that. He'd be like, oh, I already told you about this. And I would be like, yes, you did, but go ahead. And using that observation, I went online and found that this is actually scientifically proven. If you show images, it helps decode empty speech and helps improve
Bring the memory back.
Yeah. So I use that to make my nonprofit, which is Memoirs. And, it's just a play on words on for the title of the nonprofit. But what we do is make memory boxes for elderly, which is personalized to them with images for them. And then we also do a young women in medicine program, which goes back to my whole point about education, because we obviously want to use our, platform for a better purpose. So we're having university students start our young women in medicine program. We also have more apps. We're partnering with VR communities. We're doing letters and just a lot of different things with Facebook, Oculus, and all of these different companies in trying to further education and further involvement and understanding of, neurological disorders. So the one thing that I try and do is also not give that traditional education. I'm sure we both have been in classrooms, and when we're learning about science, it's just science. And when we're learning about history, it's just history. Yeah. I like to bring them both together in the types of education initiatives that I do. So when talking about Alzheimer's and dementia, I'm trying to tell people that, there's obviously things that happen in your brain, like the neurotransmitters and all of that, but also impact society on such a deep level. The economic impacts of a disease like Alzheimer's and dementia, the stress it puts on, the working population, and all of the different aspects and social aspects are not typically covered because they're like, oh, it's just too challenging, or just, not of interest because it's typically only science, only technology. But I wanted to expand that outlook in my nonprofit as well. And lastly, and I know I've been speaking for quite a while, so I'll keep this quick.
No, keep on going. These are such good initiatives. I really like the idea of memory box. That's so interesting.
Thank you so much. So the last thing is a magazine centered on politics, economics, and philosophy. And you'll see this theme throughout. As I mentioned, politics is a very big part of my life, and so is economics and philosophy. So I remember getting Time magazine books when I was younger, the Time for Kids books that I would flip through in classrooms or read about online, or even those Brain Pop and, PBS Kids videos. But all of that content that I remember was science related, or very, very core tech and basic science, like what is whaling, what is fishing, and just explaining that. But as a humanities student and someone who's dedicated to the humanities, I thought, I wanted that exposure to politics, philosophy, and economics earlier on in life. And, it's typically said, oh, it's too complex, too much thought, and it's too hard for kids. But I'm trying to dumb it down. Not at all. I'm not trying to dumb it down. I'm trying to actually build it up and make kids feel like adults, because ultimately, as students, you and I, at least, we oftentimes are spoken down to. We're not, thought of as seriously sometimes. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be getting the information that you deserve. So you should be able to know who the president is and what his political ideology is, but also about the Secretary of State, about the heads of other countries like Angela Merkel, Justin Trudeau, and all the other stuff that's happening worldwide. You should also be able to understand what money is because you use it on a day-to-day basis. And so many kids say, I want to know, I want to make money when I grow up. So understanding like the basic concepts of life is something that I'm trying to do with my magazine. But again, I keep asking myself, like, why is my initiative different than all the other stuff that's out there? And for my magazine, what I did is I made the content gender neutral, which means that it's not like blue for boys and pink for girls. With growing LGBTQ communities and allyship all throughout the world, we need to recognize that community in our magazine. And I'm doing that by making sure that it's not it's gender androgynous, so it's not just one color for one gender. So people can see themselves in a magazine and see that, you know, they're not alone. And I think that's the importance of education, to feel like you're wanted, feel like you're part of a community. And the pictures that we include are racially diverse. So it's not just like one, you know,
one community.
Exactly. And more people can see themselves in the content that we publish. So those are my 3 major initiatives overall.
Like, it was such good initiatives. Like, I didn't even realize, like, it's been 5 minutes and since we are on one question. It's such good to hear about all your initiatives and the work that you're doing. And I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
So coming back to the topic on sustainable development goals, I'm pretty sure you've heard about Agenda 2030, right?
Yeah.
So how do you think we'll be able to achieve Agenda 2030? Maybe like using your organization, what do you think your organization can work toward achieving Agenda 2030?
So for me, Agenda 2030 is just centered around like the topic of promoting peace. And I think that's like one of the major stipulations made in that agenda itself. And I think in the present community and the present climate that we're in, promoting peace can only be done by promoting education and promoting understanding. Because I think much of the problems that come out in communities are a result of lack of information or misinformation, for that matter, as well. And that's typically done, and people typically, you know, promote violence by giving people one-sided opinions and views. So I know after this whole virus, there's going to be a major conflict between multiple ethnic communities. There's already been conflict within the U.S. between, you know, with the Black Lives Matter movement, and with the with just people of color struggling overall worldwide, and you know the U.S.-China conflict, and there's just so much more. But I think in a time as polarized as this, it's important that people stay educated and stay connected overall, and ultimately remember that they're united under the whole banner of being a citizen of the world, a citizen of this, you know, of this globe. And ultimately what each of us want to do is make sure that there's equality, there's equity, there's justice. And no matter what, you know, background you come from, I'm sure you agree with all of these. You can, you know, reflect on all of these. So I think that the peace aspect of Agenda 2030 is the major thing that I want to focus on, at least with my organizations.
That's so good. Peace is the main thing that can achieve Agenda 20. Like, if there's peace, people are getting educated, people are not dying of hunger, good health is there, so every goal can be tackled. And if you think it of a way, like as we said before, education also tackles all the goals. So what I think is, like, every goal is interlinked with each other. You achieve one goal, the other will line up. So before we end this podcast, do you have any thing that you would like to say to motivate the youths like you and me?
Yeah, all I would say is observe and reflect. And I think that's what is the major motivation for me. Whenever I design something, you should never feel pressure to, you know, say, I want to go and just start doing the UN SDG goals because it seems like, you know, everyone who's doing it is gaining attention. Everyone is becoming popular. That's not a motivation to, you know, promote these in your communities. For me, the motivation was what I saw in 8th grade, but I know so many people are not lucky enough for that. So what I would tell you is just see what your community faces and see what you face on a day-to-day basis and find ways to address it. Find ways to make your communities better. And if you need support, if you need help, there's always going to be people in your community willing to, reach their arms out and pull you up or help you, just to get your initiative across. And I think necessity is the mother of invention. Like that whole quote is quite well said and quite a depiction of what the present situation is all across the world. So I think find a need and address it. And I think if you address it wholeheartedly, you will make a change and there will be an impact. And even if you just do one thing, you don't have to start more than one thing. You can do just one simple act. And that act can just be like making someone smile tomorrow, or giving a small portion of your meal of something you're going to spend on online shopping towards a charity to help the crisis in Yemen. Those small acts, they go a long way. And I know it's cliched to say that, but it's quite true. And I think there's a reason that something is cliched. It's because it's been tried and tested, and it's because it is true. So I think that's the one major word of motivation I'd give to everyone.
Well, I'm pretty sure many of the youth will be motivated by that statement. And like, even if you can help one, as you said, every drop counts. Like, help one, he'll get motivated from you, and he'll help others. So like, the chain will keep on growing. So thanks for the motivation, and thank you for coming to this podcast. And I'm hoping for our collaboration in the future, and maybe we can work together.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for giving me this platform. I really enjoy sharing it with you. And thank you for letting me share it with you as well.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
You too. Take care.
Bye.